"You people don't belong here!" The words cut through the lobby like glass, sharp and deliberate. The clerk's voice was loud enough to silence the soft jazz spilling from the speakers. Heads turned. A woman in a dark hoodie froze where she stood gripping her reservation papers as though they were a lifeline. "I said this place is for real guests," the clerk sneered, his lips curling with contempt. "Not for people like you trying to sneak your way in." A murmur spread through the lobby. A couple waiting at the counter stiffened. A bellboy fumbled the luggage cart. Every sound seemed to vanish except for his voice. The woman swallowed hard, her throat tight. "I have a reservation," she said. Her voice calm but firm. She slid the papers forward, her hands trembling despite her restraint. The clerk didn't bother looking. Instead, he leaned in, voice dripping with venom. "No, what you have is a problem, and I'm not letting you drag this hotel down." The insult wasn't just words, it was a public stripping of worth, a humiliation staged for strangers. Whispers rose, some curious, others uncomfortable, but no one stepped forward. Phones began to lift, red dots glowing, recording the spectacle. The woman steadied her breath. She knew this moment wasn't just hers. It was being immortalized in real time, captured and judged by countless unseen eyes. And still, the clerk's glare burned through her, daring her to collapse. Every movement in the lobby slowed. Guests hesitated mid-step, caught between discomfort and fascination. A child tugged at his mother's sleeve, whispering, "Why is everyone looking?" The mother shushed him quickly, eyes glued to the unfolding scene, phones tilted higher, fingers tapping screens. "Can you believe this?" someone murmured behind the woman, the whisper slicing deeper than the clerk's cruelty. The humiliation was no longer private. It had become a spectacle. Strangers who knew nothing of her carried pieces of her pain in their pockets, broadcasting it with every swipe and post. The clerk smirked, feeding off the silence, his authority swelling in the absence of intervention. He relished the stage, each second of dominance sharpening the humiliation. And in the middle of it all, the woman stood rooted, her dignity pressed under the weight of countless watching eyes. Her hands trembled, but she refused to let them see her break. Beneath the hood, her jaw clenched, her breath measured. She held her ID and reservation tighter, knuckles pale against the paper. Inside, fury demanded release, begged her to shout, to strike back. But she swallowed it whole, letting silence become her weapon. The clerk tapped the counter with mock impatience. "If you think flashing some papers will make you worthy, you're wrong. I don't care what name is written there. It doesn't belong in this lobby." A few gasps rippled through the crowd, but still no one intervened. Her voice was low, but steady. "Check the reservation," she said. No pleading, no trembling in her tone, just restrained authority. But the clerk laughed, waving her off as though she were invisible. "People like you always try to play the system, always trying to be what you're not." She held her silence, not because she had nothing to say, but because she understood the moment was bigger than words, and while he mocked her, her silence spoke volumes, igniting discomfort in those watching. Unworthy. The word landed like a slap across the marble. Counter. The clerk made sure everyone heard it, his voice rising, proud of the cruelty. "Show me your ID," he barked, though it was already in her hand. He snatched it up, waving it around as if it were forged. "This doesn't look right. Probably fake. I've seen this trick before." Her stomach tightened, but she stood unmoved. "You think money buys you respect?" His laugh was cold. "Not here. Not for someone like you. You'll never be equal. You'll always be unworthy." The crowd shifted uneasily. Some exchanged glances, others lowered their eyes. Yet no one spoke. No one challenged him. His accusations filled the silence like poison. She inhaled slowly, pressing back the surge of shame threatening to suffocate her. He wanted her to break. He wanted tears. He wanted the moment he could point and say, "See?" Instead, she held his gaze. No words, no collapse, just presence. For the first time, a flicker of unease cracked his smugness, but he masked it quickly, leaning harder into the performance. And still, she endured, carrying the weight of his venom like a shield. Every stare pierced her like judgment, some curious, some cruel, some quietly sympathetic, but all pressing down on her shoulders. Her chest tightened, shame clashed with rage, creating a storm within. She wanted to vanish, yet another part of her wanted to stand taller, to prove she belonged. From the corner of her eye, a man whispered to his partner, "Maybe she did something wrong." The words cut deep, the assumption heavier than the clerk's insults. Her pulse thundered in her ears. The lobby had transformed into a courtroom, and she was both defendant and evidence. But deep beneath the suffocating pressure, a quiet strength began to stir. Something within her refused to bow. Her fingers rose slowly, brushing against the fabric shielding her face. With deliberate calm, she gripped the edge of the hood. The crowd leaned forward, anticipation buzzing through the air. The clerk's smirk twitched, unsure whether to gloat or to fear. She exhaled, steady and certain, and began to lower it. Inch by inch, the shadows slipped away, revealing the truth beneath. Gasps trembled on lips before they were even released. And in that fragile pause, everything in the room began to shift, though no one yet knew how far the change would reach. "Finally," she whispered as the bus doors hissed open, releasing her into the cool evening air. Her hood hung low, shadowing her face as she stepped onto the pavement. No flashing cameras, no eager hands tugging for autographs. Just silence. The exhaustion of back-to-back rehearsals clung to her body, every step heavy with the weight of constant performance. Tonight, she didn't crave applause. She wanted peace. Dragging her bag behind her, she melted into the rhythm of the small town. A couple passed without a second glance, and for the first time in weeks, anonymity wrapped around her like a gift. All she wanted was rest, far from the stage, far from recognition, just one night where she could exist unseen. The hood wasn't just fabric. It was armor. Beneath it, she traveled under her birth name, the one untouched by fame, the one that carried childhood simplicity before the world decided who she should be. She thought of how often she had been chased by flashing lenses, strangers dissecting her every gesture. "Normal," she muttered to herself. "I just want normal." Choosing to check in with her real name wasn't rebellion. It was longing. A quiet test of whether she could ever belong without titles, without status, without the shield of celebrity. Her heart carried both hope and fear. As she walked toward the glowing hotel sign, her thoughts steadied. Exhaustion tugged at her, but dignity reminded her not to falter. Her mother's words echoed, "Patience is not weakness, it's power." She tightened her grip on the bag handle. Life had taught her that anger was easy, but grace demanded discipline. Every time she chose restraint, she carved space for strength. Even here, in an unfamiliar town, she carried that lesson. Her pace was measured, her breath even. Though drained, she reminded herself, "I am not fragile. I am not invisible." Stillness, she believed, could disarm storms before they ever broke. The hotel shimmered against the night, its glass doors gleaming like gateways to a world reserved for the chosen. Inside, the chandelier glowed with golden light, its brilliance masking a truth whispered in corners. Generations of guests had passed through those polished halls, wealthy, powerful, perfectly polished. Yet behind the smiles and slogans of luxury hospitality, the establishment carried a reputation. Quiet exclusions, unspoken rules. Some travelers were welcomed with champagne, others met with suspicion. She felt it even before stepping in. The walls seemed to whisper that belonging here came with conditions, that acceptance was selective. Still, she lifted her chin. To her, a bed was a bed, no matter how gilded the lobby appeared to be. Her footsteps echoed as she entered. The hush of the lobby pressing against her. She sought only a key, only rest, nothing more. Yet beneath the surface calm, a current stirred. Conversations paused too quickly. A glance lingered longer than courtesy allowed. The reception desk gleamed, but so did the eyes measuring her. She ignored it, focusing on the promise of sleep. "I just need one night," she murmured, setting her bag down. But the silence around her didn't feel like welcome. It felt like waiting. As if the building itself knew she would not pass through unnoticed. What began as a search for rest was already bending toward conflict, though she could not yet see the storm forming ahead. "Next!" the clerk barked without looking up, then turned to a white couple lingering behind her. She stepped forward, voice steady but quiet. "I have a reservation under Carter." The clerk glanced briefly, barely lifting her eyes. "Oh, just a moment," she muttered, turning back to her previous guests as if the words had never landed. Each second stretched, a quiet erasure of her existence in plain sight. Others in line shuffled uneasily, sensing tension but unwilling to intervene. Phones peeked out of pockets, eyes darted around, but no one spoke. She kept her posture upright, hands relaxed around her bag, though every inch of her ached to scream, to demand acknowledgement. Yet she knew that anger alone wouldn't open doors that prejudice had locked so tightly. Her presence was treated as optional, her humanity an inconvenience she had to navigate. A drawn-out sigh echoed from the clerk as she rifled through paperwork, exaggerated and pointed. Her eyes rolled subtly when the protagonist cleared her throat. "Really?" she murmured under her breath, loud enough for the protagonist to hear. Each sigh, each glance, was a quiet weapon, a microaggression that stung, sharper than a shouted insult. Every gesture broadcast her supposed insignificance, turning a simple check-in into an emotional gauntlet. She tightened her grip on her bag strap, inhaling slowly, trying to anchor herself. The humiliation was subtle, insidious, and it cut deep, layering the moment with tension and quiet disbelief. Even the polite nods from bystanders felt hollow. They watched, yet failed to intervene. "Are you sure you can afford this room?" the clerk asked, voice a tight mix of curiosity and suspicion. "I've prepaid," the protagonist replied evenly, sliding her reservation into view. "Maybe you should consider one of the smaller motels down the street. More affordable," the clerk added, smirking as if offering concern. The words sank into her chest, each one pressing against her pride. She had traveled countless miles, planned meticulously, and yet here, her presence alone became a problem to negotiate. Other guests shuffled past, whispering under their breath, glancing back as if judging her worth along with the clerk's. The humiliation wasn't just personal, it had become public, performative. She swallowed the rising heat in her throat, recalling every lesson that told her patience was her weapon, and restrained her shield. Calmly, she presented her ID and reservation, voice steady but quiet. Everything should be in order. The clerk flicked through the documents with deliberate slowness, her eyes darting sideways to the staff, who shared brief, knowing glances. Complicity hung thick in the air, a silent chorus that underscored the judgment she faced. "Let me double-check," the clerk muttered, scanning the screen with exaggerated care. Each second felt heavier than the last, a silent trial weighing her right to stay. Every glance, every pause, pressed her dignity into the spotlight. Her breathing remained controlled, her expression composed, though inside a storm raged. She clung to restraint as fiercely as she clung to her reservation, aware that every moment counted toward the fragile balance between endurance and confrontation. By the time she reached the desk completely, the clerk's tone hardened. "Are you sure this is your booking?" she asked. Words sharp as knives. The implication was clear. Her presence was inconvenient. Her legitimacy doubted. "I've confirmed it online," the protagonist replied, each word precise, even as frustration simmered beneath the surface. Cha. Clerk's voice carried the weight of suspicion, turning a routine check-in into a test she hadn't signed up to take. Every syllable seemed designed to question her existence in this space, leaving her acutely aware of the social judgment pressing in from every direction. She inhaled, counting to 10, weighing her options. A single sharp retort could explode into conflict, but restraint demanded more courage. She bit back the words that threatened to spill, holding the storm within. Endurance had been her companion long before tonight, and it would not abandon her now. "Your card's been declined," the clerk announced, voice loud enough to cut across the lobby. A chill raced down her spine. She knew her account was in perfect order. "That's impossible," she said calmly, sliding the card closer. He smirked, ignoring her words. Maybe you should try another one." His tone carried the satisfaction of someone enjoying a private victory in public. People around them shifted, glances flicking her way. Some raised eyebrows, others whispered, curiosity twisting into judgment. The lie was more than a mistake. It was a weapon, wielded to make her question her presence, to humiliate without raising suspicion. "I've prepaid this room," she insisted, voice measured, carefully holding the card as proof. "Yeah, right," he scoffed, eyes scanning her like a detective doubting a suspect. "Seems there's a problem, though." The words hit harder than physical blows. Around her, whispers grew louder, a mounting pressure that made the air stifling. The clerk had transformed a routine check-in into a public trial, and she was the accused. He leaned back, eyes gliding over her outfit with deliberate mockery. "You sure you belong here dressed like that?" he asked, voice heavy with implication. Her pulse quickened, but she held her composure. "Excuse me?" "You know," he said, a grin tugging at his lips. "Not exactly the type we usually host. Maybe the lobby's too fancy for casual wear." Guests glanced sideways, some smirking, others pretending not to notice. The insinuation hung in the air, invisible yet suffocating, feeding their curiosity and inviting silent complicity. She straightened, chin high, resisting the urge to snap. Clothing should never define acceptance. Yet here it was, weaponized, a proxy for racial judgment she'd navigated countless times before. The clerk's eyes lingered on her deliberately, each second amplifying the unspoken verdict. "You don't belong." Whispers multiplied, weaving a chorus of judgment. Some guests laughed softly, glances exchanged like inside jokes. Phones emerged from pockets, cameras pointed subtly as if documenting her humiliation was entertainment. She felt the weight of every eye on her, the lobby morphing into an audience of silent accusers. The murmurs echoed her worst fears, being scrutinized not for who she was, but for the color of her skin and the audacity to exist where she had a right to be. "Can we speed this up?" one guest muttered under their breath, voice dripping impatience, joining the involuntary theater, her lips pressed into a firm line. Each sound was a reminder that prejudice often thrives under the guise of civility, that cruelty can wear a neutral mask while thriving in plain sight. She clung to her patience, every heartbeat a quiet act of resistance. "I have the reservation right here," she said, lifting the confirmation toward him, keeping her voice calm despite the rising storm. He waved her off, shaking his head with theatrical exasperation. "Stop! You're wasting my time! Please check the system. You'll see it's all correct," she urged, trying not to let desperation seep through. The clerk's response was a snort, followed by a raised volume that cut through the whispers of the lobby. "I don't care what you say. People like you cause problems, and I won't have it in my hotel." Shock coursed through her. Words like knives, precise and cruel, aimed at every nerve. She held the card tighter, grounding herself in reason as his voice climbed, attempting to drown out her proof, her dignity, and her truth. Other guests shifted uneasily, some inching closer, others leaning back, complicit in silence. The power, imbalance was raw, amplified by the crowd's passive observation. Her calmness now became a fragile shield against the storm of verbal assault and public judgment. Frauds and people like you don't belong here. He sneered, gesturing toward security with a dismissive flick of his hand. The words landed like hammers against fragile glass. Her breath hitched, rage mingling with humiliation. Around her, the lobby hummed with uncomfortable curiosity, eyes tracking her every movement, some sympathetic, many voyeuristic. "I've done nothing wrong," she said, voice firm but cracking, slightly under the pressure. "Doesn't matter," he replied. "Your type always brings trouble. We can't have that." Security emerged. Footsteps deliberate and slow, magnifying the sense of inevitability. Each step toward her was a silent reinforcement of systemic prejudice. The lobby itself, a stage where her presence was questioned, judged, and publicly condemned. She tried to explain, lifting her ID again, offering proof that should have ended the ordeal, but the clerk interrupted at every turn, each word sharpened with derision. The assault was not only personal, it was institutional, performed for an audience that either cheered silently or cowered in passive observation. The sting of betrayal, humiliation, and exposure pressed down like a physical weight, leaving her, lungs tight and heart racing. Security now loomed, their size and presence amplifying the intimidation. "Step aside, ma'am," one said, voice low but firm, the implication clear. "Comply or escalate." Her pulse hammered as she weighed every option. Resistance could provoke violence. Submission would cement the public shaming. Around her, murmurs intensified, cameras focused, whispers multiplying like a chorus of judgment. The lobby's spotlight fell entirely on her, the crowd silently complicit. Humiliation had transformed into direct threat, the boundaries between observation and participation erased. She was trapped in a spectacle she hadn't asked to star in, with authority figures endorsing every cruel assumption made about her identity. An assistant manager appeared, poised in a crisp suit, a glimmer of hope in her chest. "Can we resolve this?" she asked softly, expecting reason, fairness, and impartiality. Instead, the manager nodded toward the clerk, voice neutral yet decisive. "I'm just supporting my staff. Let's move forward." Her hope faltered. Masked as policy and professionalism, the manager's stance was another layer of injustice, another endorsement of the humiliation. The system wasn't broken by mistake. It was intentionally complicit, an apparatus shielding bias under the guise of procedure. The betrayal cut deep, sharper than the clerk's words. Support had been the lifeline, now withdrawn, leaving her exposed to scrutiny, ridicule, and escalating abuse. She inhaled, jaw tight, trying to assemble the fragments of composure left to her. Anger clashed with shame, resilience strained against the weight of systemic complicity. Surrounded, silenced, her humanity felt suspended on trial, each heartbeat a reminder that in this lobby, prejudice had been dressed as policy, and dignity was now a precarious struggle. "Wait! Isn't that—" someone whispered, eyes widening as phones tilted upward. The murmur rippled like electricity, spreading from one guest to another. Faces turned, murmurs swelling into a tide of recognition. Clips began to appear. On social media in real time, each camera capturing fragments of the moment. Her presence, once dismissed and questioned, now carried a gravity no one could ignore. People who had glanced skeptically at her just minutes ago now leaned in, piecing together the hidden identity in their midst. She's the activist. "The one on every headline!" Another voice broke the whispered code of speculation. She remained composed, shoulders squared, letting the realization ripple through the room. The lobby, once a stage for her humiliation, now quivered with curiosity and awe. Every skeptical glance transformed into an unspoken acknowledgement. This was no ordinary guest. The atmosphere shifted, tension twisting into anticipation, waiting for her next move. Slowly, deliberately, she lowered the hood that had shielded her face. Gasps erupted, punctuated by the sharp intake of collective breath. Recognition flooded every corner of the lobby. "Is that really her?" someone whispered, disbelief mingling with excitement. Phones clicked, hands raised to capture a moment they could hardly believe. The clerk's smug confidence faltered, replaced by a visible tremor of uncertainty. He had assumed authority over someone he thought ordinary, but now that facade shattered, chaos edged the edges of civility. Guests leaning forward, murmurs escalating, awe and shock tangled together. Her identity had transformed the power dynamic, instantly exposing the vulnerability beneath the hotel's carefully maintained hierarchy. Even the air seemed to pulse differently, charged with sudden, undeniable energy. Cameras flashed, phones recorded, and voices rose into cheers and cries of recognition. "That's her! That's the one who—" The narrative twisted in real time. The woman once publicly shamed was now celebrated, her previous humiliation rewritten by visibility and influence. Social media erupted, hashtags trending within minutes, live streams capturing every reaction, amplifying the spectacle beyond the lobby. Fans stepped forward, some calling out support, others snapping selfies in solidarity. The shift was unmistakable. Scorn had transformed into spotlight. The clerk's earlier authority, once unquestioned, now trembled under the glare of collective acknowledgement. "You! This changes everything," someone muttered, pointing toward the front desk. Whispers of respect replaced the gossip of ridicule, and the lobby that had humiliated her was now a stage where admiration demanded attention. Recognition was a weapon, and she wielded it effortlessly. The clerk's confidence evaporated. His posture stiffened, eyes darting as if searching for a lifeline. This isn't happening," he muttered, voice tight, fingers fumbling over the register. Each attempt to assert authority faltered, drowned by murmurs of astonishment. "Sir, may I speak with her calmly?" the assistant manager asked, masking panic with corporate politeness. He blinked, uncertain, realizing that his previous certainty had no bearing in this new reality. Recognition had stripped him of control. The power he had wielded to belittle and intimidate was suddenly irrelevant. Guests watched in fascination, noting every micro-expression, every tremor of authority eroding. The once menacing figure behind the counter now appeared small, unsteady, and entirely human in his faltering. Security, who had loomed like sentinels, froze mid-step. Commands halted on lips, the weight of uncertainty grounding their movements. No longer enforcers, they became observers, trapped between duty and the sudden gravity of who stood before them. A silent current of recognition pulsed through the lobby. Even authority, reinforced by uniforms and procedure, could not move forward. The air shifted, suspense hanging like a tangible force, poised between past humiliation and the unfolding reckoning. She remained calm, poised, each breath measured, the unexpected shift rendering intimidation powerless. Stepping forward, she let the lobby feel the quiet authority radiating from her. Calm, deliberate, her voice carried across the murmurs. "This is what happens when you judge worth by skin, not humanity," she declared, eyes locking with the clerk's. The words were precise, cutting through the tension sharper than any scream could. No anger, only unwavering truth. Recognition of her identity amplified the impact, the moral weight of her statement undeniable. Guests leaned in, hanging on each syllable, captivated by the reversal of power. The lobby had become a classroom, the humiliator now the lesson, and those who had once watched silently now awakened to complicity. Even the assistant manager paled, understanding that policy could not justify prejudice in the face of truth. Voices rose in defense, a chorus pushing back against the hotel's authority. "Enough!" one guest shouted. "She's done nothing wrong!" Phones captured the shift, guests confronting staff, shaming injustice, advocating openly. Momentum swelled, transferring power into her hands as collective action replaced passive observation. Where intimidation had ruled, courage now surged. The lobby, once a theater of humiliation, had become a battlefield of accountability, every voice reinforcing her rightful place and dismantling the narrative the clerk had tried to enforce. Within minutes, the scene ignited online. Tweets, hashtags, and live streams multiplied, ensuring that the injustice could not be hidden. The lobby's moment of reckoning became a global spectacle, a viral reminder that truth, visibility, and resilience can topple prejudice even in the most controlled spaces. By sunrise, phones buzzed incessantly, notifications piling up. "Beyoncé humiliated at a luxury hotel," one headline screamed. Articles multiplied across national outlets, blogs, and trending social media feeds. Fans shared clips, hashtags, spreading like wildfire. "Hotel shame? You justice for Beyoncé? You stand against racism. Did you see this?" a voice in the cafe murmured, eyes glued to a tablet. "Everyone's talking about it." The story, once confined to a lobby, had erupted into a public reckoning, headlines amplifying the truth and sparking debates on discrimination, privilege, and accountability. Overnight, the world could no longer look away. By mid-morning, the hotel reeled under intense scrutiny. Sponsors abruptly withdrew partnerships, reservations vanished, and management released statements heavy with apology, yet lacking authenticity. "Damage control isn't enough," murmured an employee, watching as cancellations flooded the system. Public outrage intensified online, with influencers and journalists dissecting every misstep. The hotel's polished image, carefully curated for years, crumbled under exposure. Each tweet, live stream, and post ensured that silence could no longer shield negligence. The backlash was swift, unrelenting, and global, turning the establishment from prestige to pariah in mere hours. The clerk, once smug, was promptly terminated. Yet she refused to make the story about personal revenge. "This isn't about one individual," she said quietly, eyes steady. "It's about systemic disregard, bias, and the voices ignored far too long." Her focus remained resolute. The narrative would highlight justice, not vengeance, shifting attention from anger to awareness. Later, she posted a message across social media, her words resonating with millions. "No one, celebrity or ordinary citizen, should endure humiliation rooted in prejudice," she wrote. "Dignity is universal, resilience is essential, and accountability is non-negotiable. Let today remind us that injustice thrives only in silence. Stand, speak, and protect humanity." Shares skyrocketed. Comments poured in. Gratitude, solidarity, personal stories. Her statement transformed the incident into a larger movement, emphasizing empowerment, self-respect, and collective responsibility. Her words ignited action. Protests emerged, community forums debated systemic change, and local service industries pledged accountability. "What she said matters," one organizer declared. "It reminds us that speaking truth can shift culture, reshape expectations, and amplify those who have been silenced for too long." The next day, she walked through the same lobby, posture unwavering. Not as a superstar, but as a voice for the overlooked, her presence a living testament to dignity reclaimed. "Pause for a moment," she asks directly, eyes meeting the camera. "What would you have done if you saw this injustice unfold before you?" "Think back," she continues, voice steady. Have you ever faced a moment where bias or discrimination tried to silence you? How did you respond? Share your story below, she urges. Comment, like, and subscribe to keep this conversation alive. Your voice amplifies awareness and inspires accountability across communities. Every voice matters, she emphasizes, tone unwavering. Spread this story widely so no one ever feels unworthy again. Together, we challenge injustice and demand respect.